One of the stresses I'd really like to make is that intermediaries make markets for commercial surrogacy. And when it comes to enforcement and regulation of legal or illegal commercial surrogacy, states should really be focusing on intermediaries. We're not in favor of criminalizing surrogate mothers. And in terms of intending parents, that may not be appropriate either. Intending parents have essentially been uh, sold a bill of goods in a literal sort of sense that, this is fine. And even if it's not legal where you come from, it'll be fine. Just don't worry about it. And they've been sold a bill of goods. And most intending parents are really quite sympathetic. And we're not angry at them in that sense. But the intermediaries are making the market. And we also feel that that often the intermediaries, if there is sale of a child, are the ones that are primarily selling the child and the ones that are at a minimum secondarily complicit for the sale. So I want to go through different markers of how we see intermediaries being primarily responsible for creating these global and domestic surrogacy markets, and therefore why regulation and enforcement really won't do much good till it focuses on them. The first is that intermediaries structure and control the terms of the surrogacy arrangements. So I'm going to give India as an example of this. India recently prohibited commercial surrogacy, but for many decades, they were the prime low-cost market for international commercial surrogacy. And we have a lot of research telling us how that was conducted. What I'm going to talk about now will be typical. I can't claim it was every instance, but this is what the research from India showed. First of all, it showed that foreigners contracted with the intermediaries first. And in a sense, the arrangement was made between these two parties. The foreign intending parents, whether from the US, Australia, Europe, wherever it may be, were not directly interacting with potential surrogate mothers for the most part. They were rather interacting with, in this instance, medical clinics. And the medical clinics were not just providing medical services in this instance. That doesn't make you an intermediary just to provide services. Rather, they were facilitating the arrangement itself. So what does that mean? They draft the contracts, they advertise, they solicit, and they then go out and recruit the surrogate mothers, and they bring the parties together. So the parties don't find each other. The surrogate mother and the intending parents don't happen to, across the ocean and the internet, find each other. The intermediaries do all of that. In India, it was rather extraordinary that, in fact, it was typical that the surrogate mothers did not sign the agreements until after pregnancy was established. So they went through all the process of, doing this implantation of an embryo and all of that, all of the medications they would have to take and so forth before ever signing. By the time they signed, they were already pregnant. So it's quite clear that, in a sense, in the context of India, it was really two different agreements. In a sense, the intermediaries contract with the intending parents, and then to facilitate that agreement, they go out and try to create a child by recruiting poor, vulnerable surrogate mothers. The next marker that we see as well is often intermediaries exercise extraordinary control over the location, movement, family life, healthcare, daily schedule, and travel of the surrogate mother. So again, in the context of India, for example, and this isn't everywhere, but this was quite common, the surrogate mothers who typically were already mothers, already with a life partner, other children, maybe a joint family context in India, they would leave their family homes for most of the pregnancy and reside in dorm type facilities run by these medical clinics. And the medical clinics would literally 24/7 control their day-to-day life. They would control what they ate, when they went to sleep, when there were lights out. They would control whether or not they were allowed to see their own families. Could they come see them? Could they leave? It almost seems like a probation/prison type setting. It's quite extraordinary. They controlled the medications, healthcare, medical interventions. And it was quite typical as well that the surrogate mothers had very limited understanding of the healthcare decisions being made for them, and that those healthcare decisions were being made much more for the benefit of the intending parents than for the health of the surrogate mother. Obviously, they wanted the surrogate mother decently healthy, but whenever there was a conflict between what the intending parents would want and what might promote the health of the surrogate mother, they had such control over the surrogate mothers that they sort of just did it. They didn't really give what we would consider proper informed consent to each healthcare intervention. So that kind of extraordinary control suggests again that it's the intermediaries who are the sellers if sale does occur. A third of all, intermediaries in a broad sense control the terms of the arrangement. This really goes to the first one as well, but I want to focus again on the terms of the contract. What that often meant in, say, India is that the surrogate mother didn't know what she was going to be paid. When you don't get to keep a copy of the contract, you don't ever read it. A few parts are translated, and those few parts are the ones that most advantage the other party, which were essentially, according to the research, it's not your child, you got to turn over the child. And we'll pay you in this range of things, but it depends on how pleased we are with you as to what you actually get paid. In other words, contracting with the surrogate mothers was a control mechanism rather than a true negotiation between equals. So what you see then again is the intermediary is sourcing a product through the surrogate mothers, rather than it being a contract between surrogate mothers and the intending parents. We see this in Ukraine as well. The largest or one of the largest intermediaries in Ukraine is so concerned to keep the surrogate mothers and the intending parents separate that when they brought in the intending parents to be able to even see in person or see through a video, the photograph that I've seen, which they did choose to disclose, they didn't see this as odd, was essentially you had the woman getting an ultrasound on a bed, you have a screen between them, and then you have a screen that you could watch, a TV screen outside the screen. And this was basically designed so that the intending parents literally could see the image of the fetus inside the surrogate mother without ever seeing the surrogate mother. Now, clearly, when you go to those extremes to keep the surrogate mother separate from the intending parents, it's not a contract between those two. Ukraine was one of the most important commercial surrogacy centers in this middle income kind of setting, less expensive than the US, maybe more expensive than, say, India, Thailand, Cambodia. That in that context, you still had intermediaries exercising extraordinary control of the contacts between the surrogate mothers and the intending parent. I think that as we think about intermediaries, we have to realize that they're making most of the money. Even a context like the US, where the surrogate mother is comparatively well paid and comparatively is not controlled in the same way as I've talked about. Nonetheless, a surrogate mother who might be paid $40,000, $50,000, say, for a California surrogacy in the context of a $150,000 to $200,000 total cost surrogacy, nonetheless, she can only be a surrogate mother a few times. But a surrogacy agency, which are the intermediaries in a US context, can do hundreds of surrogacies. So even if their profit margin for each one is less, they're the real market makers. They're the ones truly profiting. The other thing that I think states that currently do not legalize commercial surrogacy have to be aware of is that often intermediaries directly market to prospective intending parents from countries where commercial surrogacy is not legal. That's a big part of their market, and they're well aware of that. And so they do knowingly facilitate surrogacies, knowing that it's not legal back where the child's going to go. And so they believe in this back door. They believe and read the various court decisions to say it doesn't matter whether it's legal, you'll get parentage in the end, so it's all fine. But that deliberate marketing of surrogacy as a back door to those to whom it's not legal undercuts any kind of child rights framework. How are we going to have a proper suitability review across two states where the state where the intending parents come from doesn't permit this? We're not going to be able to get the kind of sharing of information, criminal background checks, checks of child abuse registries, the basic kind of safety protocols we want when an intermediary markets commercial surrogacy, to people from a state where it's not legal. It just can't be done safely. It can't be done in a child rights way. Why do intermediaries do it? Because it's part of their profit margin. The more surrogacies they do, the more money they make. It's just as simple as that. So I think it's very, very important that we turn enforcement efforts directly towards intermediaries. I think we're really only at the beginning point of understanding intermediaries and all the roles they play in creating these markets. And that's where research, enforcement, regulation needs to go, regardless of whether commercial surrogacy is legal or not. They're trying to create these markets.